For sure, R. Kelly is a superstar. For sure, there are a lot of consenting adults. There were a lot of people who probably were groupies that did partake in a lot of activities with R. Kelly. But to oversimplify 9 witnesses that speak of what I believe, if the jury believes it, really heinous activities, acts of sexual oppression against men and women, to overly simplify that when they actually heard live his voice and some of the things that he did to some of these victims, I think is a very risky move. And I don't think that you can oversimplify that case in that way. I think, frankly, it was a bad move for them to make in closing.
Day 21, September 22nd, 2021. Prosecutor Elizabeth Gideon spent nearly 3.5 hours walking jurors through the testimony of some of Robert Kelly's alleged victims, arguing the crimes committed against them collectively add up to a racketeering conviction against the defendant. Day 22, September 23rd, 2021. Prosecutor Elizabeth Gideon has concluded her closing argument. She went for about 3 hours that day, for a total of about 6.5 hours over 2 days for her closing argument. Jurors have been asked to return at 1:45 for the defense's closing argument. Gideon concluded by saying that the government has called 45 witnesses and presented hundreds of exhibits. She said, "It is time to hold the defendant responsible for the pain he has caused," naming the Jane Does, Aaliyah, Sonia, Stephanie, Geronda, Jane, and Faith.
As the defense attorney characterized the behavior as not criminal, now that's just wrong. We're here in this courtroom because it is criminal. I would have objected, and I would have, if for no other reason, to stand up for those victims who deserve to be heard, for their voices that deserve to be believed, and for those jurors that were paying attention and believed, even if they just believed a few of them, if they believed any of them, I feel like that's the role of prosecutors, to stand up for the victims and the witnesses that are testifying in a case like this. And remember, there are 11 witnesses, and of those 11 witnesses that testified as victims, not the witnesses, but the victims, 6 of them were underage at the time that they were involved with R. Kelly, which is the definition, as we talked about before, of statutory rape. For that reason alone, I would have been more vociferous about objecting and making it clear to the jury that someone believes those men and women that were testifying. Someone believes that a crime has been committed, and I want you to believe that as well, and you're going to hear me be adamant and defensive about it when it gets mischaracterized on purpose as an adoptive admission from defense counsel in a case like this.
Closing, suggesting that the jury was facing a similar fight, asking them to be courageous and fair, and that by being so, that they would clear Kelly of all charges against him. Was this a stretch, and was this inappropriate?
I think it was a stretch, and I think it was terribly inappropriate, especially given where we are in this country now. I was actually disgusted by the mere comparison of R. Kelly in this case. Even if you assume he's innocent, the allegations in this case to compare him to Dr. King was a very, very bad move. And if they wanted to paint a path for the jury to walk down and convict him, they opened up the door and they laid that path right in front of the jury. That's how I saw it. Because if there were any people that were on the fence and really felt that some of the witnesses lacked credibility, by drawing that comparison with just the right jurors, you could have people or jurors that would really take a stand because they would be so offended by that comparison. I'm not sure why they took that move, why they took that risk, because that was a horrible risk in my impression.
Well, I don't want to get into what led up to that or problems we had within the defense. I will say that I think some of it has been borne out during the trial where things weren't done and witnesses weren't lined up and so forth. Let's see what happens here, and then we'll address those things if need be.
So how do you think R. Kelly's defense was?
Well, again, I don't want to comment on it at this point. I haven't read all the transcripts. I'm sure that Mr. Canik did his best, as I have said. I think that going into it with Nicole and Tom, he was going into it with two hands tied behind his back. This is a case that required 3, 4, 5 dedicated, hardworking, knowledgeable, and talented attorneys, and he got 1 or 2.
Yeah, there were reports that the attorneys that he was left with were inexperienced. This is a big,
well, they were,
but
again, let's see what happens. If he wins the case, then everything he did was right. If he loses the case, then I suspect that he'll get counsel and he'll revisit some of the things that have gone on.
R. Kelly's defense attorney, Devereaux Canik, told the jury, "You and you alone are the judges of the facts. You've been called," he said, "to discern the guilt or non-guilt of Robert Sylvester Kelly." Canik said the government let their witnesses lie on the stand and purposely mislead the jury. He blamed prosecutors for massaging and tweaking the truth to fit their narrative. Canik says R. Kelly told women he had multiple girlfriends, and that Kelly is an older man who prefers younger women. Also adding Kelly likes men, women, and kinky sex, and he says it's not a crime. He said Kelly's record label marketed him as a sex symbol and playboy, so Kelly started living that lifestyle, comparing Kelly to Hugh Hefner. He told the jury Kelly likes to be called daddy as a term of endearment, not a form of worship. He said Kelly treated his women like gold, buying them handbags that cost more than cars. He said there was no abuse and no rape. The women lied. The accusers, he claimed, want paydays and book deals. Canik said, like many other superstars, Kelly settled some cases against him, but he never admitted to any wrongdoing. And Canik called out some accusers by name, like Geronda Pace. He called Pace a super hustler and stalker, saying she sued Kelly 3 times but still wanted to be in a relationship with him. And Sonia, a 21-year-old woman who testified, she was kept locked inside a room for days with her cell phone. Yet Canik said she never called the police for help. And on the question of R. Kelly giving women herpes, Canik told the jury all the women he was in long-term relationships with never contracted herpes. Only the women involved in lawsuits claimed they were infected with the incurable disease. Well, the jurors have now requested a full transcript of Sonia's testimony along with that floor plan for Laramie Street. Another request they had was for the testimony of a underage accuser who went by the name of Jane. Jane was a 17-year-old girl who left her home in Orlando, Florida to be with R. Kelly in Chicago with her parents' permission. She was an aspiring singer and dancer, but prosecutors say instead R. Kelly groomed Jane to become one of his underage girlfriends, and they carried a sexual relationship on for quite some time. Now, they also want to see a letter that Jane wrote to her brother, and in that letter, supposedly Jane wrote several things that her parents had been lying to her, that her parents were actually prostituting her to R. Kelly for money, but Jane testified she did not want to write that letter on her own, but rather R. Kelly made her write that letter as a form of protection, and instead she says the letter never made it to her brother. Instead, it went to R. Kelly's attorney's office. So again, it would seem as if the jurors are taking their responsibilities very serious by asking a lot of questions, and they still, it seems like they have a long way to go before they can reach a consensus.
It was completed September 27, 2021. R. Kelly is found guilty of all counts and faces life in prison.
I'm familiar with R. Kelly's behavior even before Aaliyah. So we knew the rumors were there and people just ignored them. And it just kept happening over and over and over again.
The conviction marked a stunning fall for a man who who was once one of the biggest names in R&B music. It came after the first Me Too era trial in which most of the victims were black women. The conviction of R. Kelly on all 9 counts against him came as a significant moment in the Me Too movement for both black women and for the music industry, ushering in a sense that finally justice had been served. But the verdict on Monday also prompted an obvious question. Women have said that the singer's abuse began as early as the start of the 1990s. Why did it take 3 decades for the singer to receive criminal punishment? R.KELLY is set to be sentenced at 10 a.m. on June 16, 2022, by the same federal judge who oversaw his racketeering and sex trafficking trial in Brooklyn. Mr. Kelly, 54, faces 10 years to life in prison.
Okay, so I want to deconstruct that for a second and begin with black women and girls. We have a problem in the United States with any kind of sexual conviction of black women and girls. Less than 2% of sexual crimes actually lead into a substantial conviction, and that number is half when we talk about black women and girls. So this definitely does bring the sexual victimization of black women and girls onto a federal stage. As far as power, definitely powerful men have always been protected by the power of patriarchy and toxic masculinity to do the things that R. Kelly has been doing for 30 years. I really want to reiterate that this has been going on for over 3 decades. From Aaliyah. Aaliyah happened in the 90s. So I've been following this and speaking out against this in my professional spaces for over 30 years. So this definitely is a culmination of so many years of activism, so many brave survivors, so many brave journalists, people who have received death threats to have come together for this moment. And it should not have taken 30 years.
The past intervening months have been busy. In the past weeks, Mr. Kelly's lawyers have filed motions seeking to overturn the verdict. Mr. Kelly also faces charges in at least 2 other states, including federal child pornography and obstruction counts in Chicago. That trial has been postponed several times, and a new date and is set for August 1st, 2022.
Yes, so part of the reason why we're in the place that we're in is because when you have 60% of black women who are survivors of sexual violence before their 18th birthday, we have a sexual violence problem in the black community. And that means that there are a lot of enablers and a lot of predators. So when I hear this music playing, when I hear people speaking up in support of R. Kelly, what I hear is that they're speaking up in support of the status quo that allows the sexual cannibalism that occurs in our community. So when I hear urban radio stations playing R. Kelly's music, in their mind, it's probably just a way to be contrary. But what I hear is that you are supporting sexual violence. And as we begin to dig deeper into, that industry, we find that R. Kelly was not alone. R. Kelly was not alone. He was the most egregious, but he was not alone. So what I hear when I see that, what I feel when I see that is, of course, disgust. But it also is an indication that we have a problem in our community with supporting the status quo of sexual violence among black women and girls, and that needs to change.